Hello from Gareth and me for another edition of fascinating words and phrases. And today we're going to talk about one that is a major misconception. And certainly I misunderstood this one. And the phrase is, it's enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey. Now, often we think these are maritime expressions or Shakespearean. Some of them are religious. But this one has really got me nonplussed. So, Gareth, over to you.
Yes. Now, I always thought that it came from a naval saying where basically the cannonballs on a ship were going all the way back to like the 1800s and before that, well, 16, 1700s. The iron balls were stored on the ship deck in a framework called a brass monkey, and the framework was made of brass, the balls made of iron, and when they sailed too far south or too far north, then basically the different contractions made the balls fall off the monkey. Yeah,
Yep, that's my understanding.
but that's not true.
Oh,
That is not true. It is a myth. Um, Research has been done and there's no historical evidence that a brass tray was called a monkey on a ship or anything like that. And in fact, cannonballs, they weren't stored on upper decks, they were actually stored away securely. Yeah. So basically, these frameworks that kept the balls on didn't really exist. But the biggest thing that dismisses the entire myth is physics, because the amount of contraction between brass and iron wouldn't cause the balls to fall off, unfortunately.
mm,
So,
to
where
tell
does
us
it
the
come
truth.
from? Yes, so the it's nobody really knows where it came from or has been able to work it out, but the theory is basically in Victorian times they were big into like humor and exaggeration and a little bit of risqué kind of um, sayings. I mean, we covered Fanny and all the rest of it, and that was similar with them. That basically it was a case of they'd like to use like rude ways to kind of use words. And there were two sayings that existed before, and they were hot enough to boil the brains of a brass monkey and cold enough to freeze the tail off a brass monkey. Now, these existed before Victorian times. And basically, what they think is that because of all the risque kind of humor from Victorians, that they turned cold enough to freeze the tail off to cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey. Okay.
Right.
So it's a perfect example of British humor, in like, adding a naughty twist to something. Um, so what is a brass monkey?
Yeah.
That's what we got to think about, and probably nothing. Um, it's probably just a fanciful image, like mad as a box of frogs. Yeah, because there's no real etymology behind mad as a box of frogs. It's like just if you had a box of frogs, they'd probably be really, really annoyed, you know?
Yeah. And jumping everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So it's believed that basically the brass monkey is literally just something that came along as a way to just, it's a fanciful image. And if it was that cold that the balls fell off, then essentially, it would be cold. And that's pretty much it, really.
I
So,
wonder if there's something to do with the Victorian era where monkeys, brass and otherwise, were used as religious symbols. So at the time of the Indian Raj,
yeah,
they would have come across these kind of symbols. And as you say, I mean, the Victorians are amazing, where they used to clothe the legs of pianos, didn't they? Because that
yeah,
was obscene. So
Yeah.
very, very strange, very
Yeah, but
strange.
going back to the monkey has been a symbol for quite a long time. So, a brass monkey might have been something that was made. I've got a brass donkey on my desk. I like donkeys.
Right.
Um, but essentially, the brass monkey. I mean, if you look at see no, speak no, see no, hear no evil,
Yeah.
they're monkeys. They're
Yeah.
usually depicted as little monkeys.
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, it is fascinating, but it probably is it is just a case of it's a throwaway kind of like silly saying, but
A
it doesn't
risk, a
come from
risky saying, a
the
risk.
risque. Yeah, it doesn't come from the Navy.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because although we're not doing it now, there were a number of risque sayings
Oh
or
yeah,
risque words that were used in place of profanities, and we're going to research one a little bit later about Burke and where that comes from.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's fantastic. I love that, and as I say, it was a total misconception when everybody ever said, "Oh, you're researching these words and phrases. What about freeze the brass the balls off a brass monkey?" And then I trotted out this maritime thing. So thank you for that, Gareth. That's very, very interesting and changed perceptions there. So
totally.
if that's changed your perception and you would like to hear more, then do like, subscribe, comment, and let us know what you want to hear about. We love doing these, we love having fun with them, and we hope that you have fun with them as well. So, see you next time. Bye.
Bye bye.